Anyway.
You know, I hacked on mine. Not a good
I think we're all in the
idea.
same boat, though. I think we're all in the same boat.
We are. Um, Welcome to everyone that is tuning in this morning, or if you watch it on replay. Really, the edicts are starting to come down with a plan of when we're going to reemerge and reopen businesses and what that phasing could look like.
Sure.
Certainly, Clay County announced yesterday, followed shortly after by North Kansas City, supporting Clay County's decision. Lots of controversy over the timing of that, but regardless, it's coming. And so, smart business owners are going to be using this time to prepare for reemergence and what that's going to look like. And as I said yesterday in a live stream, back to the Tylenol cyanide poisonings. Duane, you'll remember this back in the early 80s.
Yes, I do. I am that old, yeah.
They had a choice of just taking Tylenol off the shelves in Chicago or taking them off the shelves in the entire country. Rumors about how those conversations went down exist, but ultimately Tylenol made the choice to take them off the shelf everywhere because let's face it, if you picked up a bottle of Tylenol after the Tylenol poisonings, you were not sure if that bottle had laced cyanide in it. And
Right.
that was a huge risk. So they were never going to sell a single bottle of Tylenol ever again anyway.
Yeah, that's correct. And, that's, again, a big part of what we're talking about here is not just making sure everything is safe. That obviously is the highest priority. But the other thing for business owners, of course, is to make certain that people feel comfortable coming into their business and doing business with them. And that's as much about their marketing strategy as it is the actual safety of the facility.
Absolutely. And Tylenol went out on a limb. They put their R&D department in, and that's how, if you don't know why you get frustrated opening your over-the-counter drugs and stuff, that's where it came from. It was they patented the tamper-resistant packaging.
Correct. Yes.
So they had to answer that one burning question of how will our customers or any customers of any over-the-counter product ever feel safe buying over-the-counter and not from a pharmacy ever again? And they answered that question. So for us, today, our burning question is we may have already taken all of the precautions that we think that we need to or that we're mandated to take. The powers that be may have said, yep, we can start opening businesses and phasing it in. But that doesn't change what's the question in the mind of the consumer, the general person that is going to need your services or want your services of, am I really going to be safe?
Yeah. Public perception obviously is the reality when you're a business owner because you rely upon that to get people in your door or to continue to do business with you. Certainly, anyone who can maintain an online presence should do so and probably already are doing those things right now and should continue to and maybe even look at ways of making it more robust because there are going to be a lot of consumers, quite frankly, especially older consumers, who are going to have a really difficult time ever feeling comfortable going back out into public, and it's understandable. The other thing, of course, if you're going to open a brick and mortar, reopen it, the things that you're seeing right now if you go to the grocery store or to the hardware store or whatever, the social distancing components, the markings on the floors, the plastic guards for checkout personnel, things of those things. Those are inexpensive ways to give confidence to someone coming in your door that you're on top of things and that you're doing the right things. There are other things that you can do as well for those who have not invested, for instance, in looking at ways to improve their HVAC systems. One of the things we're seeing here in Connecticut, it was just posted a few days ago that a bar off of a campus of a college had 9 people infected who were socially distanced because their HVAC system picked up the droplets and spread them around. So there are ways to fix that too. You can do improved filtration systems in your HVAC systems. You can also invest in there a few $100s, but put UV radiation systems in the ductwork. These kinds of things are a little bit more pricey, but if you put that on your front door, hey, we have UV radiation sterilization in our ductwork, that gives confidence to your customer coming in the door that they're on top of things.
Especially for businesses that have larger volume and density of individuals that might be in their place of business.
Yeah, and that's another thing is, and you've probably seen some of this. I know the Aldi stores and Trader Joe's and some of the other stores around town have put somebody outside to count the number of people in the store. And you can identify based on your square footage and so forth what a proper appropriate density is. If it's 20 customers or if it's 10 customers or if it's, whatever that number turns out to be based on your square footage. And mark that, put a big sign in the front window, so only 20 people at a time or whatever, and have somebody out front with a counter. And that also gives a sense of confidence to the customer that you're on top of it.
So I want to take a step back because I was negligent at the beginning in giving you the opportunity to let people know a little bit about your background and why I reached out to you to bring you into this live stream today.
Sure. I always get a little funny about this because I feel a little uncomfortable blowing my own horn, but I have had a lot of experience at this. For about 30 years now, I have been in the field of public health and safety, and I've worked literally in all 50 states. I was a trainer for a contractor for the OSHA National Training Institute, and was one of the first authorized OSHA trainers in the country. I was the vice president of safety and compliance for a company called MedCore that ran over 300 clinics in 30 states. And as a part of that, MedCore was the operator of the clinic for injured workers on the World Trade Center recovery project after 9/11. And so I was the safety officer of record for that, and worked with them on doing their PPE program and so forth for the workers who were doing recovery after the World Trade Centers fell. And then more recently, I was the safety manager for the University of Kansas Health Systems, and as part of that was the regional safety officer for the H1N1 steering committee in 2009, working directly with Dr. Lee Norman, who is the current health officer of the state of Kansas. You've probably seen his white hair and distinguished look on TV. Dr. Norman is still a very good friend, and we're in contact with each other every couple of days, text messages, questions back and forth. And I have a lot of questions for him, obviously, because he's one of the finest public health officials I've ever worked with. But he, from time to time, has questions to me as well. And so we just share information back and forth and try to make sure that we're getting the best information out that we possibly can, and it's as accurate and timely as possible. Because as we've seen, this thing is dynamic. It has changed. Even recommendations from the CDC has changed. I've never, in my lifetime, in 30 years of doing this, ever seen the CDC make a recommendation of people who are asymptomatic in public wearing masks. But this is a different bug. It's not like anything we've ever seen before. People can be asymptomatic out walking around for a week or two and not even realize they're sick, and they're still spreading the disease around. And that's one of the biggest issues that we have with this, is we don't really know who's sick and who isn't. So that's the scariest part.
It is. So I got goosebumps as you were talking through your professional career, because those are some roles that were very, very significant in each of those situations, where you had to be knowledgeable and you had to be assessing the data and asking the right questions. And as we've gone through this pandemic, I rely very highly on my doctor, who I have loved so much, because she was tracking data for Kansas City and Jackson County before anybody else was. She was doing it on her own. And you were the other person that I watched very carefully for information and data. I had the privilege of knowing your background, and knowing that you were going to be putting out accurate information, as accurate as you have. Obviously, this is all changing daily even. But thank you for being that voice of reason in the middle of this craziness.
Well, you're welcome. And I tried the best I can. Obviously, none of us can be right 100% of the time. If I do accidentally put something out there though that turns out to not be as accurate as it needs to be, I try to very quickly correct that. And that's all we can do, because as I said, this is a very fluid situation and things are changing, and the realities and the facts are changing. So what was a fact yesterday may not be a fact today. But we've seen this, people are asking, why did we not have a lockdown like this for H1N1, for instance? And the rationale for that is really twofold. One is the thing that I already talked about, which is the fact that people are asymptomatic for a long period of time. With influenza viruses, you're generally asymptomatic for maybe a few hours or a day before you start to develop symptoms. And then you have symptoms usually for 4 or 5 days. That's the trajectory of an influenza virus. Coronaviruses are a very, very different critter. And in particular, this coronavirus is one of the worst I've seen in terms of the length of time that you're asymptomatic but still shedding the virus. And then you have a period of several days to even a few weeks that you are symptomatic. So once you get the bug, you're sick for a long time. That also creates a greater strain on the healthcare system. And the healthcare system surge is really the issue. When we in public health talk about why we need to have stay-at-home orders, or God forbid, even ultimately winds up being a quarantine like they had in 1918 with the influenza pandemic. The reason that we do that primarily is to prevent overflowing the healthcare system. Because once you use up all the resources of the healthcare system, then that not only begins to increase mortality and morbidity among people who have the COVID disease, but also those who need those resources and services who have other diseases that no longer have them available to them. So let's say somebody presents with just a regular pneumonia, but can't find an ICU bed or a ventilator because they're all tied up with COVID, then those people are at greater risk. And so we see the overall mortality of the general population go up, as well as the COVID population. There was an article in the New York Times last week that did a fantastic job. A bunch of French researchers looked at this, about how many people are getting sick and dying, getting sicker than they should, and even dying because of lack of access to resources, who don't even have the COVID disease.
Wow.
So that they call them the missing deaths. And there are always some of that anytime there's a pandemic, but this one has been particularly bad because, yes, people talk about how many overall people die from, say, seasonal flu. And seasonal flus can be really bad. I mean, we can see a seasonal flu in 6 months kill 50, 60,000 people. What we don't see, though, is that 1 month ago today, we hit our 1,000th person in the United States who died of this disease. 1 month ago today, 30 days ago today. Today, we'll hit 50,000. So that's 49,000 people who have died in 30 days. And so what that shows you is the trajectory of the disease is spreading so rapidly that overcoming or overwhelming the healthcare systems is what we're worried about. It's not happening in Kansas City yet. It may not. I hope it doesn't. If we all behave ourselves, maybe it won't. God bless that if that happens, right? But in certain areas, certainly in New York and Boston and New Orleans and Miami and Chicago and Detroit, Los Angeles, San Francisco, we are seeing those systems being flooded and overwhelmed. And so those are the biggest concerns that we have, because it creates irrational and unnecessary deaths. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
So before we go on to practical applications of what business owners can do to make sure that their consumers are safe and are perceived to be safe when they come in, because those are two different things, but they're very important. Explain the difference between the stay-at-home order and an actual quarantine, because people are using those interchangeably and they're not the same.
No, they are not the same. A quarantine is literally you are not allowed to leave. If you need something, you need to have someone go get it and bring it to you. And we've seen quarantines. Now, quarantines are ordinarily issued when somebody is symptomatic or has a known exposure. So you've been in close proximity to somebody who has been tested positive. Right now, we don't have sufficient testing supplies to be able to test everybody who wants to be tested. I saw that Clay County is opening up quite a bit of testing, and that's really great news. And the more of that kind of public surveillance or community surveillance that we can do, the better, because that'll be faster that we can get things opened up once we realize the scope of the problem. The problem that we've had up to this point is we haven't had enough tests to be able to ascertain the scope of the problem in the community. And with a bunch of people out there walking around who are asymptomatic and shedding the disease, and we don't know who they are, that's the issue. So going back to that, we need to ramp up that testing as rapidly as we can. I'm glad to see Clay County taking a leadership role in that. And hopefully we'll be able to see more and more testing done like that over the rest of the community.
So as businesses are preparing to open, certainly restaurants and bars have health codes that they have to abide by, that are standards from not only the county health departments, but the state health department. Other businesses, typically, like our business, it's an art and music studio. We don't technically have any health codes that we have to follow, but we took steps like steaming surfaces, using the antimicrobial disinfectants. We've done some of those things, sanitizing all of the painting tools and instruments, things like that. On our own, we did that. Is health department standards enough? Do we need to do more? Do we need to explore better options? I don't know.
Yeah, well, keep in mind that health department standards are designed around a normal situation. We are in anything but a normal situation, obviously, right now. So there are guidelines, excellent guidelines from places like the CDC, the World Health Organization, the National Institutes for Health. These organizations have put out some very good guidelines that go the next step for this type of a pandemic situation. Now, what you're doing is exactly right. And you know what? One of the things I hope is one of the great takeaways from this is we become a lot more aware as a society of the spread of infectious diseases in general, because there are thousands of infectious diseases that are out there that are not COVID, and we're exposed to them every day. Now, we want to make sure that we maintain our immune systems, which means we need a limited amount of exposure. But at the same time, we need to be a lot more careful about the things going on, and just in our normal work and life environments. And I think hopefully this raises that awareness.
So let's take the restaurant and bar industry, or your dentist office, your any of those places that you would be, even lawyers' offices where you would be in one-on-one. Obviously I think that there's going to be some attention given to proximity to other people. How we sit at conferences may look a little bit different perpetually going forward. One of my things that I have a difficult time with, because I have chemical-induced asthma, is spraying cleaning chemicals in restaurants on the tables to sanitize, because then those particles get in the air and they get my lungs, and then I have a hard time breathing.
Right.
How do we balance those types of needs? Because this is an aerosolized virus, and yet we're putting things in our lungs that could compromise us. Is there a best practice in how we sanitize?
Certainly, aerosolized sprays, the Lysols and things like that, if you can find them, which is another issue right now. But those things are probably not the best solution for somebody who is in your situation with asthma. My wife is in the same situation, and she's an RN, so she's got to be very cognizant of these kinds of things. Pump sprayers, the squirt sprayers, tend to be a lot better about not aerosolizing these droplets of chemicals and making them less likely to be inhaled, so they can be a better solution. And certainly using just a cloth of some kind, pouring or dipping in the solution and putting it on that way is going to prevent you from having to inhale so much of the chemical. Now, the other thing, though, to be aware of course, is that a lot of these chemicals contain volatile organics and other kinds of things that, as they decompose on the surface, release chemicals into the atmosphere as well that you will inhale. So you want to be as careful as you can to be away from them. Wearing a mask when you do it also helps prevent some of these droplets from being pulled into your respiratory system. So those are all things that you can do. And when you talked about the social distancing and so forth that we'll be doing going forward, I would still recommend the wearing of masks in public, at least until we have a firm handle on how, what the scope of the problem is.
So basically, all of the things that we have been recommended to do for our personal safety as businesses reemerge, it's still wise to, I mean, obviously when you're at a restaurant, you can't wear a mask while you're eating, but you can certainly use it, entry and exit. You can use it when you're walking to the bathroom, things like that. Hand washing. One of the things when I taught nutrition at the University of Missouri, I've seen all these hand washing videos, and we would do this motion to get the soap and the water underneath our nails, and not one single demo. They're all doing this thing and this, and but none of them are
this. Or what? That's very important. I agree, because under your nails is probably the dirtiest part of your hands.
Exactly. Frankly. So I've been seeing all these videos that people are putting out about proper hand washing techniques, and nobody's really putting out proper hand washing techniques. So I've been tempted to put that video out, because those fingernails capture it, the fingernails, and then in the crevices around your nail bed, lots of bacteria stick in those places.
If you're familiar with the cooking show host Alton Brown, he has an actually excellent one out there. It's typical of his stuff. It's kind of corny and funny, but he does show an excellent technique. So that might be worth looking at. It's on YouTube. You're absolutely right. And hand washing remains the single number one best thing we can continue to do. There's no question that washing your hands more frequently, and use soap and water. People say, well, with the alcohol hand sanitizer. Alcohol hand sanitizer is a great thing to keep in your purse or keep in your car, have in your pocket, and use if you don't have access to soap and water. But soap and water are actually a lot better at killing this virus than alcohol hand sanitizers are. The reason is this is what is called a lipioid or lipid-coated virus, and that outer lipid or fat coating on the virus itself is subject to destruction by anything that is a surfactant. Well, soaps are surfactants, and so the soap itself actually does a better job of killing the virus than alcohol does. So using soap and water is the best thing you can do. Frankly, even though it's harsh on your hands, the best soap you have in the house for killing this virus is your dish soap. Just good old-fashioned Dawn dishwashing soap is the best coronavirus killer in your entire house. It's better than the ammonia, bleach, or anything else you have.
So as a business owner, when we opened up our brick and mortar, we were using paper towels on the roll, your brawny or whatever. And then when we moved to our new location, we have the pull paper towels out of the dispenser. And part of us was like, oh, we should invest and wire in one of the hand dryers. And what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been known to be wrong, that hand dryers are actually less sanitary than using the napkins.
They certainly can be, especially if you're not very thorough in your hand hygiene. If you don't get your hands fully clean, when you stick them under there, it starts basically blowing the stuff around and putting those infected droplets into the air. So the air dryers can be, especially if people are not very thoroughly washing their hands, can be less sanitary than the towels.
So one of the things that I'm doing with my clients that I'm consulting with on this reemergence plan is, even if you have the air dryers, have the option of paper towels. The consumers that come into your place of business can make a choice of which one they want to use.
Yeah, and in terms of going back to what we said at the top about making certain that your customers are comfortable coming back into your facility, having those kinds of options, and maybe even putting signage up in the bathroom on the mirror or the wall or whatever, it says that for your safety and convenience, we're offering you this additional option, those kinds of things. I think anytime that you put something together that helps your customer be safe, tell them. Put up signage, make certain that you're letting them know this is why we're doing this, and it's for your protection. That makes your customer feel a lot more comfortable and confident in shopping when doing business with you.
Now, initially at the beginning, we talked about that this is not just a physical problem of what processes do you have in place and identifying where you might have some holes that you want to beef up sanitation, but it's also the marketing problem of how do you let your customers know. And yeah, we want to be careful that you're not just saying that you've done these precautions, but you haven't actually done them. If you're going to be truthful in this as a business owner, be truthful that you're actually doing what you've said that you're going to do.
Absolutely.
And that giving the messaging to them, informing them, isn't the same thing as doing a sales pitch. If you're doing it as a sales pitch, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons anyway. But if
Right.
you're just telling them for their edification of what you've done so that they can feel comfortable, as a marketing strategy, it's truthful, it's honest, it's transparent, and effective.
Correct. And again, you're right. I mean, make sure you're not telling them you're doing something and you're not doing it. But if you are doing it, make sure you're telling them you're doing it. So that's kind of the whole strategy. And make certain that it comes across as genuine and you know that you are showing legitimate concern for their safety and well-being.
Yeah, I think of going into a big box store, and on the back of the bathroom door, they have the schedule of cleaning,
Yes.
and most of them aren't filled out, and they're filled out sporadically.
Uh-huh. I'd
And
rather not see that than rather not see the sign up there than see it not completely filled out correctly.
exactly, I want to know if you've got that in place. Does that mean that every time there isn't a signature on it, that it wasn't done?
Right.
Because
Yeah,
that's actually sending the opposite message.
that's right. That's sending the wrong message. And so you've got to be real careful about that too. I like seeing those signs that say, so and so check this every hour or whatever. And as long as they're signed off on, and I've had some level of confidence that these people are at least sending somebody in the bathroom to sign it, so they can see what's going on in there. So, that's. But again, yeah, you're right. The worst thing you can do is have one of those signs up there and then not be filling it out.
So, having been through H1N1, having been through the World Trade Center, having been through hospital systems and clinics, hand washing is still the number one. Is there any other things that we as business owners should really take to heart in our planning and preparation for reemergence that you haven't covered yet today?
Well, yeah, there are certain things. One of the things to keep in mind is, and I saw this at All Things at a coffee shop the other day that was inside the grocery store, and I went in to get groceries, and they have the little coffee shop right inside the door, and they have the social distancing and they have the sneeze guards and all those kinds of things up and the markings on the floor. They look terrific, and then they have their employees looking like an anthill crawling all over each other back behind the counter. So no masks and no gloves, and it's like, well, that's not sending the right message either. So you have your employees behind the counter practicing.
Absolutely.
They need to be practicing the same practices as you're asking your customers, maybe even more so because they spend more time in the day in each other's company. So yeah, that's what I would say. One of the biggest things is just make certain that your employees are behaving as you would ask your customers to behave, and you don't have your employees crawling all over each other behind the counter. So if that makes sense, and I think
great point. Sorry.
No, you're all right. One of the other things, though, I was just thinking is you see the grocery stores now have somebody stationed outside. They're wiping the carts down and all those kinds of things. If you have a basket or a cart or whatever that your customers need to use, stationing somebody to do that sends a really good message. I mean, that's something that is an easy thing to accomplish. And look, if you're not like a grocery store where you have a constant stream of people coming in your front door, just having somebody go over there and wipe down the basket or whatever periodically, and put the station there with the wipes and the signage saying these have been sanitized for your protection or whatever, and have that stationed right inside the front door so that people see that when they walk in the door. Even if they're not going to pick up a basket, at least they know you're on it.
Absolutely. And I know that some grocery stores have had difficulty maintaining those supplies because of the situation. So one of the things that I did early on is have my disinfectant wipes in my car. I take 2 into the store with me.
Yeah.
I wipe down my cart with it.
Yeah.
I then lay the other one, and then I dispose of it, and then I lay the other one down on my purse.
Okay.
So when I get over to produce, when you get the bag off the roll to put your produce in, it's so hard to get them to open up. And so I just literally wet down the tips of my fingers with the disinfectant wipe, and then I can, instead of licking my fingers, I can
right.
open the bag and get my produce in it. And so I use that periodically through the store to help myself in the shopping process.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea.
It's something simple to do, and if they were offered by the store, I would certainly use them. But I had bought one specifically for my car at the beginning of this, and I'm not even halfway through the roll.
Right, I did the same thing. I have one in my car as well. I use it very similarly. Yeah, and that's a great point. And the other thing, and I want to go back to hand hygiene just a little bit. People are misusing gloves.
Oh, and, yes.
People think that putting a glove on is going to protect them. It's really not. The glove can actually be worse than your hands if you don't use it correctly. First of all, the bug can live on a glove for up to 3 days, where it'll only live on your hand for a few hours. So having the gloves on, all that is a barrier that prevents cross-contamination. So that's the way they're used in, the restaurant industry, and how they're used in the healthcare industry and so forth, is to prevent cross-contamination. But putting a glove on and just wearing the gloves all day doesn't do anything to help you. And I see people, driving their car with their gloves on and then getting out of the car and going into the store. It doesn't make any sense. If you put the gloves on and don them correctly. Let's say you've got your mask in the car with you and you've got your gloves in the car. Put your gloves on, use those to put your mask on, because that allows you then to touch your face with clean gloves. And then go inside the store with your wipe or whatever. And when you pick something up with the gloves, I would take the wipe and just wipe the glove surface real quick.
Ooh.
And, just to make certain that the glove itself doesn't cross-contaminate anything. Then when you're done at the store, take the gloves off and dispose of them with the wipe if you're using disposable gloves. If you're not using disposable gloves, you can use, let's say, a leather glove or whatever. That's fine. Have your alcohol hand sanitizer there and wipe that on your gloves, and then set your gloves aside.
Oh, those are great ideas.
So that way you're not using, the glove is not actually cross-contaminating anything. Also, if you remove a rubber glove, there are some great videos on that from healthcare institutions. One of the things that we taught all of our clinicians and service workers in the hospital in their orientation is how to properly put on and take off a glove. In the parlance of OSHA, it's called donning and doffing. But the taking off a glove, let's say you've got your gloves here on your hands and you need to remove them. What you want to do is you want to take and pinch the glove, pull it up. Okay, so you're pulling it up like that off of your hand. And then once your hand is free, you put it under this glove and turn them inside out. And now all the viruses are trapped on the inside out gloves in the middle, and you can safely dispose of them. There are videos online about that as well.
I never really thought about that because I've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
Because when my husband was going through nursing school back in the early 90s, I watched him do it, and he was practicing it, and then I did it, and we showed the kids how to do it, and it has always been a part of how we operate. But
yes.
I never really thought about that as something that we probably should teach people.
Absolutely, because most people, they'll whatever to take the glove off, and no, there's a proper technique, and like I said, there are a lot of good YouTube videos from healthcare systems and things like that out there on how to do it. It's not a complicated process, as you know. You've been doing it for years, as have I, and we do in our family. As I said, my wife being an RN as well. It's something that we've kind of take for granted, but I see a lot of people doing it incorrectly. The other thing, do not do, and I've seen this all over town where I've had to go into grocery stores and other things like that, is people throwing their gloves on the ground. That is just nasty, guys. I'm sorry. Those gloves need to be properly disposed of, because that virus, like I said, will live laying around in that glove for 3 days.
Well, and think of the person who has to clean that up, because somebody's going to have to clean that up, and you just put them in jeopardy even if you didn't mean to.
Correct.
The sanitation wipes, I've seen those thrown on the ground, and
Right.
I've literally taken hand sanitation wipes in my hands and picked up the ones that have been discarded and thrown them away for someone else, because it's not fair to jeopardize someone else.
Correct.
Mr. Cook, my 8th grade civics social studies teacher, he drove me crazy because he used the words "in essence" all the time, like every other sentence. But the thing that stuck with me out of everything that he taught us was our rights end where someone else's rights begin.
Correct. And that's really critical.
And I think that's one of the lessons we need to learn from this pandemic is we have the right to open the doors of our business, but our customers have a right to not come to our business if we haven't taken the steps to keep them safe.
Correct.
We have the right to not wear a mask if we don't want to, but we don't have the right. I will, my business, as long as it's appropriate, we'll have masks that we want people to wear in, because our right to stay healthy as business owners is just as important as their right to not choose. And if they choose not to come to our business, it'd be the same reason that they don't come to our business because they don't like where it's located or the services that we offer or anything else. It's part of doing business, and what we decide is going to be part of our brand.
Well, and ultimately has the same net effect, right? So the other thing you talked about, masks. One of the things that we talk about in our line of work, especially with people using a lot of homemade masks and cloth masks and all kinds of things that are not actually, NIOSH certified respirators, is that these masks have a far less efficiency and efficacy than an actual N95 respirator.
Right.
And they don't really necessarily protect the wearer so much as they protect the people around the wearer from the wearer's droplets. They capture or knock down the droplets from the breath of the person who's wearing it. So my mask protects you and yours protects me, and that's part of the the whole looking out for each other, the whole social fabric that we live in right now, is that I'm going to wear a mask not because I have the false sense of security that it's going to keep me from inhaling the virus. It may not. It may to a degree and not to a degree. I've seen those studies. I understand that if you put a bandana around your face, it's only about 2% efficient in protecting you from inhaling the virus, because the bandana doesn't filter down to 3 microns, like the size of a droplet. A coffee filter is 20 microns, so it's like putting a screen door on a submarine, trying to put a coffee filter over your face and think it's going to protect you from the virus. What it will do is it will capture and knock down the droplets coming out of your own mouth and nose to make certain that they are not being spread around the public. And so it's a matter of, I do it because it's socially responsible for me to do it to protect you.
That's a great point. And if you get 2% or you get a minuscule amount that protects you in the process, then it's positive on both ends.
Exactly. I mean, so much the better. But some of these masks that you buy, some of these cloth masks and stuff like that are 40-50% effective in protecting you, which is pretty darn good, without having to be fit tested for a respirator. So.
And right now, part of something's better than all of nothing.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's everyone's social responsibility to protect the public at large, and showing that you're doing that within your business gives your customer a lot of confidence.
So I want to conclude. I know that we've gone about 40 minutes, and that's about the maximum that people are able to digest at this point. I think we're spending so much time on technology. Thank you, first of all, for taking the time out of your day to help me help businesses and consumers know how to reemerge safely and what best practices that we can put into place. Is there anything that you want, any last comments you want to share with people viewing?
I think the most important thing is, like everything else, let's take this seriously. Let's be diligent. Let's be prudent. Let's make certain that everybody understands that we're not taking this lightly, but at the same time, panic doesn't do any good either. That just leads to poor decisions. So let's not panic about this sort of thing. Let's just be smart and keep doing the things that we're doing and that we're asked to do by the professionals and the experts. And listen to experts. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a ton of it. And there are some great websites out there to try to identify what is misinformation and what is not. And there's the old chain mail thing or chain email that we used to always get now winds up on social media, where on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you wind up with somebody saying, well, this was said by Johns Hopkins, or this was from the CDC, or a friend of mine works for the brother of somebody who works at the CDC or whatever. And those kinds of things are usually bogus. So, if you want to know what the CDC thinks, go to the CDC website, cdc.gov. If you want to know what Johns Hopkins, says, go to Johns Hopkins website. They'll have that there. In fact, both the CDC and Johns Hopkins, along with the World Health Organization and the National Institutes for Health and all these things, all of these places at their websites actually have debunking these misinformation and myths that have been spread around in their name. So that's a really good resource for finding out what is true and what is not.
So be smart. Question appropriately.
Yes.
It's hard to, I'm a skeptic in a lot of ways. I'm a weirdo. I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm a skeptic at the same time. And that is really hard to reconcile sometimes.
Well, Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify.
Exactly. And that is my life because I'm always questioning. And not because I disbelieve or don't trust the leaders. It's because I want to make sure that all of the questions have been asked, that all of the information has been provided and considered when making decisions.
Yes.
And at this point, as much as I question government entities around the world, even in our own, local states, government, because we're all people. Mm-hmm. There comes a point where we have to trust someone.
Right.
And I give this example. When I got my cancer diagnosis, I had a very rare form of cancer. Less than 5% of the cancers that are diagnosed were my type of cancer. And mine happened to be an even more rare form that wasn't caused by H. pylori bacteria. So if you got to do it, Mindy's always got to do it weird, right? But my docs really didn't know anything because they had never really treated this type of cancer before. And so my nurse was someone that was the daughter of a dear family friend. So if my doctors all have the same education and same information available and same treatment plans, having that nurse that cared about me personally, that was my deciding factor of where I got treatment. But I still don't know any more about my cancer today than I did initially going into it. But I had to trust someone.
Right.
And so choosing who I was going to trust and who I was going to get my information from and that they had my best interests at heart was a tough thing for me because I was dealing with the unknown, which we're dealing with the unknown with this virus.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, we have to trust someone so that because they're the only ones that have access to any information where we have access to zero.
Right. And you make a great point because, and I'm familiar having known you for a while with the situation you were with your cancer. And this is very much the same because we are dealing with a novel virus. We're dealing with something that we've never seen before. The reason we don't have a vaccine and may not have a vaccine for another year or more is because we've never seen this before. We don't know what it does. We don't know how it works. We keep doing clinical trials of particular, medical therapies and things like that. And some have shown some promise, and some have shown that they're worse than the disease. So, and that's the way clinical trials work. It always is. But especially when you're dealing with something we've never seen before. Back with H1N1, for instance, that was the fourth outbreak of H1N1. The original, what they called the Spanish flu back in 1918, was H1N1. And so we had seen H1N1 before. So coming up with a vaccine for it only took a few months because we kind of knew what we were working with. We knew how to treat it. We knew what antivirals worked with it, all those kinds of things. So it made it a lot easier to get on top of it. And even though it was a terrible outbreak, there were 12,469 people who died over 16 months from that disease. We've had that many people die in the last week from this. So this is a much different animal. So that's the main thing. And we don't know much yet. So stay on top of information, I guess, is my best advice. Like you said, find someone you trust. Stay on top of the information because it changes as we learn more and more about what this disease actually is and how it works. So that would be my advice.
And the last point that I want to make before we let the business owners go and even the consumers go today is it is likely that there will be a resurgence of
Mhm.
COVID-19 at some point in the future. We don't know, obviously, exactly when, but that's the way that these viruses
Mhm.
go.
Absolutely.
And so everything that we're doing to plan for reemergence and plan for our businesses now will just help us further with that resurgence. And we know that 9 out of 10 businesses fail because of lack of planning.
Right.
And so if you want your business to survive and you want your local businesses to survive as a consumer, then putting this foresight and planning into how we keep safe, and again, keeping on top of that research and using best practices as we learn more information is how we survive.
Absolutely. And one last bit of advice: shop local when you can.
Amen to that. You know, there I showed up at the Rum Cake Kitchen the
Mhm.
day after you were there,
Right.
and
Yeah. Our good friend Craig. Wonderful place.
yeah,
Wonderful guy.
and we kept our social distance even though I was there doing a pickup, and we did have an opportunity to share a small glass of wine at opposite ends of his tables,
Right.
and practice our social distancing. But in this time, we can still build our relationships and keep them going. Practice social distancing, use best practices, support local businesses, and we will
Absolutely.
all come out of this on the other end.
Yeah, one of the things that my grandpa was an old tent preacher down in the Missouri Ozarks, and he used to say, if we don't take care of each other, nobody's going to.
Amen to that, my friend. Thank you so much. That's a great note to end this on. Thank you, Duane Daugherty, for sharing some wisdom with us today on how we can keep our businesses safe as we reemerge.
Thank you, Mindy. Pleasure to be here.